There we go. I am going to make Willa our host so that she can share her screen. And
Hello, hello, hello. It's lovely to have you folks here today. So the reason I chose these two texts was because they have a lot in common. What they have in common is that they are stories, fictional stories, we think. One is definitely fictional. The other one, probably fictional. Anyway, but we'll see if we have time at the end. You'll see that there is an allusion to an actual historical event in the second one. But they have the shared theme of being about people who have traveled outside of Egypt and then returned. By show of hands, how many of you live more than 30 miles from the place where you were born? Right, that's almost all of you. Realize that most human beings who have ever lived never traveled more than 10 miles from where they were born. 30 miles at a stretch. So the idea of someone going on such a long journey was, pretty fantastic in and of itself. I'm going to start us off with a map because I love maps. We are obviously looking at Egypt. Now, with the exception of Lake Nasser down below, which was caused by a pair of dams on the Nile at Aswan, this is more or less what Egypt has looked like for all of the historic period. By the historic period, I mean from the beginning of recorded history, which is, maybe about 5,000 years ago. Egypt has always been, at least geographically and agriculturally, a pretty good place to live, especially once agriculture was developed and people became sedentary farmers. The Nile would flood every year, bringing rich, fertile soil. And, you weren't dependent on rain. You weren't dependent on the weather. You were. The rains down in Africa is what caused the Nile to flood. Here at Lake Victoria, I really need to learn the indigenous name for Lake Victoria, but rains down here would then cause the flood season. But this rainy season was very reliable. I mean, there have been people living in Egypt for longer than there have been modern people. People have been living in Egypt since before we were Homo sapiens. In fact, the oldest skeleton we have in Egypt shows plesiomorphic features in the mandible, plesiomorphic meaning there are differences that show that a recent ancestor of this person was a different species of hominid. And so you have generation upon generation upon generation going, as far back as humanity living in this river valley. Now, around 8,000 years ago, there was no desert. Well, 8,000 years ago, the desert started forming. We had, 8,000 years ago was well before recorded history. And this was more of a lush savanna. And then once everything started drying up, people started moving towards the river basin. So, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about, even when we think of ancient, when we think of the oldest records that we know of, life in the Nile Valley was already ancient. Life in the Nile Valley was already unimaginably ancient. And even their ideas of the afterlife were basically Egypt depth, but every day is a pretty good day. And now you have these stories about people going away from Egypt. And we're going to take a look. So first I'm going to read the story to you, then we're going to go back and do an analysis. Does anyone have any questions so far? We're good? All right. Then the able retainer spoke, "Be of good cheer, commander. We have now reached home. The mallet has been taken off, the mooring post driven in, the bowline cast ashore. Praise has been offered and God has been thanked. Every man embraces his comrade. Our shipmates have returned safe without loss to our expedition. After we reached the limits of Wawat, we passed the island of Senmet. See us now, we are returning safely and we are reaching our land. Listen to me, commander, I do not exaggerate. Wash up, place water on your fingers so you can reply when you are questioned, so you can speak to the king with confidence, so you can answer without stammering." I can't do anything without stammering. "The speech of a man can save him, and his words can cause indulgence for him. Yet do only as you wish, for speaking to you is tiresome." Nice. "So I shall tell you something similar, which happened to me myself. I went down to the mining region for the sovereign. I went down to the Great Green in a ship of 120 cubits long and 40 cubits wide. 120 sailors were aboard from the best of Egypt. Whether they looked at the sky or looked at the land, their hearts were braver than lions. They could tell a storm before it came and a tempest before it happened. But a storm came up while we were on the Great Green before we could touch land, and the wind picked up and howled. A wave of 8 cubits was in it. As for the mast, I grasped it. Then the ship died, and of those who were in it, there did not remain a single one. I was placed on an island by a wave of the Great Green, and I spent 3 days alone, my heart as my companion. I lay down within a shelter of wood, and I embraced the shade. Next, I stretched my legs to find what I could put in my mouth. There were figs and grapes and all kinds of good vegetables. Sycamore figs were there together with notched ones, and cucumbers as if they were cultivated. Fish were there with fowl. There was nothing that was not in it. Then I gorged myself, and I put some on the ground because of the abundance in my hands. I removed the fire drill when I had lighted a fire, and I made a burnt offering to the gods. Next, I heard the sound of thunder, and I thought it was a wave of the Great Green. Trees were shaking and the ground was quaking, and I uncovered my face, and I found it was a serpent coming. He was 30 cubits long, and his hood was larger than 2 cubits. His body was covered with gold, and his eyebrows were of real lapis lazuli, and he was coiled up in front. He opened his mouth to me when I was on my belly in front of him, and he said to me, "Who has brought you? Who has brought you, citizen? Who has brought you? If you delay in telling me who has brought you to this island, I shall have you know yourself as ashes, turned into someone invisible." He spoke to me, but I could not hear while I was before him. I did not know myself. And then he took me in his mouth, and he took me off to his resting place. He set me down without touching me. I was intact without his taking anything from me. He opened his mouth toward me while I was on my belly before him, and he said to me, "Who has brought you? Who has brought you, citizen? Who has brought you to this island of the Great Green, 2 sides of which are underwater?" And I answered him, my arms bent before him. I said to him, "It was I who came down to the mining country on a mission of the sovereign in a ship 120 cubits long and 40 cubits wide. 120 sailors were in it from the best of Egypt. Whether they looked at the sky or looked at the land, their hearts were braver than lions. They could tell a storm before it came. Each one of them, his heart was braver, his arm more valiant than his companions, and there was no fool among them. Then a storm came forth while we were on the Great Green before we could set to land. The wind picked up and kept on howling. A wave of 8 cubits was in it. As for the mast, I grasped onto it. Then the ship died, and of those who were in it, not a single one remained except for me. See me now at your side. Next, I was placed on this island by a wave of the Great Green. He said to me, do not fear, citizen. Do not turn white, for you have reached me. See, God has allowed you to live. He has brought you to this island of the spirit. There is nothing which is not in it. It is filled with all fine things. See, you shall spend month after month until you complete 4 months within this island. A boat shall return from the residence, sailors in it whom you know. You shall go with them to the residence, and you shall die in your town. How joyful is one who relates what he has experienced after painful matters have passed by. I shall now relate to you something similar, which took place on this island. When I was on it with my siblings, children among them. We amounted 75 serpents, including my children and my brothers and sisters, without mentioning to you a little daughter brought to me through wisdom. And then a star fell, and because of it, these went up in fire. It happened suddenly, and I was not with them when they burned. But I was not among them. Then I died for them when I found them as a single heap of corpses. If you would be brave and your heart strong, you would fill your arms with your children. You will kiss your wife. You will see your house. It is better than anything. You will reach home where you are among your siblings. I stretched out on my belly. I touched the ground in his presence. But I say to you, I shall relate your strength, your might to the sovereign. I shall have him learn of your greatness. I will have brought to you laudanum, oil, spice, balsam, incense of the temples with which every god is pleased. I shall tell what has happened to me, and I shall have your fame, and what I have seen of your fame. You will be thanked in the city in the presence of the officials of the entire land. I shall slaughter oxen for you as a burnt offering. I will have the necks of fowl ringed for you. I shall have barges brought to you laden with all the products of Egypt, as should be done for a god who loves men in a far-off land which men do not know. And then he laughed at me for what I had said, in his opinion, foolishly. He said to me, you don't have much myrrh, although you have become an owner of incense. I am, sir, the Prince of Punt. Myrrh belongs to me. That oil which you said will be brought is the main product of this island. Now, it shall happen when you separate yourself from this place. You will never see this island again, since it will be submerged under the waves. Then that boat returned, as he had predicted before. I went and set myself on top of a tall tree, and I recognized those who were in it. Then I went to report it, and I found him knowing it already. He said to me, in good health, citizen, off to your house. You shall see your children, make a good reputation for me in your city. That is my only request from you. I placed myself upon his belly, my arms bent in his presence. He gave me a load of myrrh, oil, laudanum, spice, cinnamon, aromatics, eye paint, giraffe tails, large cakes of incense, ivory tusk, hounds, apes, baboons, and all good things. And then I loaded them onto the boat, and I was placed on my belly to thank him. He said to me, you will reach the residence in 2 months. You shall fill your arms with your children. You will become young again at home until your burial. Then I went down to the shore in the vicinity of this boat, and I called out to the expeditionary force which was in the boat, and I gave praise upon the shore to the Lord of this island, and those who were in it likewise. We sailed north to the residence of the sovereign, and we reached the residence in 2 months, according to everything he had said. Then I entered before the sovereign, and I had presented him with these gifts, which I had brought from within this island, and he thanked me before the officials of the entire land. I was appointed retainer and granted 200 servants. See me after I landed, after I had seen what I had experienced. Listen to my words. It is good for men to listen. And then he said to me, the commander said to me, don't be so proper, friend. What's the use of giving water to the fowl at daybreak when it is to be killed in the morning? It has come from the beginning to the end as found in the writing of the scribe, skilled of fingers. Ameni's son, Amenaa, may he live, prosper, and be in health. Any questions before we go into the analysis? I'm sure you have many. All right, I will be asking you folks questions. So this is a story within a story within a story, which I find very interesting. So it starts off at the end of a voyage, right? Our shipwrecked sailor is on this voyage. So the limits of Wawat and the island of Senmet. So that's saying that they had gone south on the Nile into Nubia. And he's telling the commander of this voyage, let me tell you about what happened to me once when I was on this trip. Now notice it keeps repeating 120 cubits, 40 cubits wide, 120 sailors. That's, storytelling, repetition, right? That's a big ship, not so small. Anyone know how big a cubit is, more or less? What is a cubit? Zoom user? What's your name so I can address you as something other than Zoom user? You'd have to unmute yourself to answer.
My name's Ryan, and a cubit is roughly 18 inches. It's from I want to say it's the point of the elbow to the tip of the middle finger.
Exactly. And now we do have many different cubit measures. It would often differ from project to project. But yeah, it's roughly the length of an adult forearm. Yes, absolutely. One of a very famous line in this is, "And then the boat died. Aha and debet mut." That's, I don't know why it's become kind of a meme among Egyptologists, but it has. Just, and then the boat died. And that's why in this translation, they decided to translate it literally because it's such a famous line. So, I mean, as you can probably, this is supposed to be pretty remarkable, because it's not just like some random island. It's like he's in this garden, this magical garden where everything is growing and everything's ripe. And any of you who have grown fruits and vegetables know that, you know, everything doesn't ripen at the same time. You can just eat it right off, you know? So where people think he is, they talk about the Great Green. Is that an expression any of you are familiar with? The Great Green was Wajwer, is the Egyptian, is the term that they used for both the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. So they called bodies of salt water the Great Green. Probably this magical island is somewhere around here. You know, of course, it's not a real place. Now, and this line is amazing. The trees were shaking and the ground was quaking. I believe the Egyptian is the word hut. Do they use hut for trees? If it is hut, it's hut hergemhem, hut hergemgem ta hermenmen. So you can hear the gem gem men men, the onomatopoeia going on, which I really like the translation of shaking and quaking, because that really captures the essence of this. And so, having you know, heard the story, what kind of creature do you think this snake is? Or mythological being, or divine being? Andy?
Some kind of like dragon or sea serpent.
Potentially. But he's very certainly a god. And this is told to us right off the bat if you know how to read it. It notes that his body was covered with gold. His hair was lapis lazuli. And any Egyptian listening to that would clock and go, okay, this is a god. This is a god of this island. Because the way the gods are described as having skin of gold, hair of lapis, bones of silver. So that's shorthand right there telling you that this is a god. And there's other things. I was on my belly in front of him. He prostrates himself like one would do before a deity. And I love this threat. I shall have you know yourself as ashes. I love that. And the snake picks him up in his mouth. And it's remarkable because he wasn't hurt. And so my arms bent before him. This is a gesture called the henu, which you will see people making before deities. It's a gesture of respect and supplication. Now, it's interesting, the two sides of which are underwater. That's it's an idiom, the two sides. That means all sides. Because what's at the center of ancient Egyptian life? Let's look at this map. What is literally at the center of ancient Egyptian life? There's not that many of us. People can just call out. We can just talk.
The Nile.
The Nile, which has
Water.
two sides. And so that means, that the whole thing is surrounded by water. But, when you're talking to people who, for a river is at the center of their universe, that's an idiom that makes sense, doesn't it? And so he tells the story again, because this is, this storytelling, this was obviously meant to be told aloud. Jacqueline, you have a question?
Yes. So you're saying it was meant to be told aloud, and there's a lot of like oral, like the onomatopoeia and the repetition and all that sort of stuff. Would this have been an oral tale first, or would it have been written down first?
That's a great question. We don't know.
Okay.
We have only one copy. That's the thing, right? The reason that I chose to talk about literary texts is that we really have so vanishingly few. Most of the texts we have from ancient Egypt are inscriptions in stone. Why do you think that is? Any thoughts?
Because it can't be very easily destroyed.
Exactly. The older a document is, the less likely it is to survive. And just because a document survives doesn't mean it's necessarily important. Things survive due to flukes, and very important documents get lost quite easily. When you think about the dynasty that built the pyramids, that's an Old Kingdom dynasty, and you think, okay, that must be we must know so much about them because they built the pyramids. If they hadn't built the pyramids, we would know almost nothing about them other than what later Egyptians wrote about them, because that was so long ago that we have so little from that time period. I mean, the history of that particular dynasty is literally written in stone. Now, the closer we get to the present, the more information we have, because time and entropy. Notice there's a lot of fours in this. 4 months within the island, and 120, which is 4 40s, right? No, that's 340. 340s. I can't do math. But no, there's 40 there. 4 is an auspicious number in ancient Egypt. And now it talks about the residence, and it's capitalized. That is a euphemism for the royal palace. It's often referred to as the residence. And you shall die in your town. And it says right there in the footnote, burial in a foreign land was abhorrent to the Egyptians. And exactly, that's why I'm talking about Sinuhe, because it's mentioned there as well. And I love this line, how joyful is someone who relates what he has experienced after painful matters have passed by. That sounds a great way of saying, listen, you can laugh about this later. Some things don't change. Now we get our story within the story within a story, where the snake tells the story about a meteor that fell while he was somewhere and killed his whole family. But some people are going, wait, gods can't die. Gods absolutely can die. In fact, one god has to die in Egyptian mythology, in the Egyptian cosmology. What god is that? Does anyone know?
That's Osiris or Wazir.
Yes, absolutely. Osiris must die. Osiris must die. That is, and that's one of the reasons why Set was not considered to be an evil deity until very late, because killing Osiris was necessary for the appropriate functioning of the universe. Osiris needs to die. Osiris needs to be the king of the dead. So there's balance. Because they believed they needed a king in the land of the living to keep this cosmic balance, this ma'at. And if there's a king in the land of the living, there needs to be a king in the land of the dead. And again, I'll have all these things brought to you with which every god is pleased. This is very clearly a god. And I love that the snake just laughed at him because, yeah, Egypt had a lot of incense at this time, but the incense isn't from there. It was, they would get it from Sudan, from Eritrea, from even as far away as Somalia or Yemen. That's, if you ever heard of Hatshepsut's voyage to Punt, she had a big, where we don't know exactly where Punt was. We do believe it is this area of Somalia, which now is called Puntland today, but that's more nationalism and an appeal to antiquity than anything else. But it's still, very interesting. But the fact that she did this big trading expedition all the way down there was so important that she put it on the walls of her mortuary temple. And he's like, yeah, you're gonna leave this island and you're never gonna see it again. And again, 2 months, which is, I love the things that giraffe tails, and hounds, apes, baboons. I like to imagine the ship that came to find him, like we got to deal with a baboon for 2 months on a boat. I don't want to deal with a baboon for 2 months on a boat. But this part of the end has always perplexed me. I don't know if it's perhaps an idiom that is lost to us, whether it's a reference to something that's lost to us. I don't know. I mean, I understand what he's saying. What's the use of giving water to the fowl at daybreak when it's to be killed in the morning? That's like, why are you going to give water to a duck that you're going to kill anyway? But what does that mean in this context? I've never been able to make sense of it. Does anyone have any thoughts? Maybe you see something I don't.
Why bother your mortal?
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, twice in this text, oh, sorry, Ray?
Yes, I was gonna say, I wonder if it connects to the line immediately preceding it, like don't be so proper, friend. It ties it back into the start of the story where the story, the speaker tells all this to the captain, and at the end the captain is like, buddy, relax. Don't be so proper. Why would you? It almost, in some ways, I wonder then if the fowl at daybreak here is maybe a reference to the crew itself, in a sort of don't be so proper. You don't need to tell us about all the ways your previous journeys have gone wrong when we're literally, it's fine.
But what's also very interesting is that twice in this text it says it is good for men to listen. Does anyone know where that comes from? That is from an older text called the Maxims of Patahota, which we know from many copies was a very popular text. It's part of a genre called wisdom literature, which is texts of advice, like ancient self-help books. Most of this advice is generally keep your mouth shut. Like most of the advice is keep your, but that's also where we the first place that we ever see the phrase "follow your heart" is in that text. All right, so any questions about this before we move on to the next one? Any questions, thoughts? Now we're going to look at Sinuhe. Now, it was once regarded as historical. I don't think it is, but it does reference a very interesting historical account of a historical event that we're going to look at something about afterwards if we have time. There was probably not a literal Sinuhe. This is another, again, unlike the Shipwrecked Sailor, who he was just on a trading, he was on a ship on a trading expedition when his ship sank. This guy left Egypt because he was afraid. We're going to talk about that. So the hereditary noble and commander, warden and district officer of the estates of the sovereign in the lands of the Asiatics. That's so the Asiatics are is kind of a weird term for the people who live in the Levant. So Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, this area were considered Asiatics. The truly beloved royal acquaintance and follower, Sinuhe, said. So this is very common in autobiographies, usually found on stele, which are like like stone monuments that people put up to their memory. Like a tombstone is a stela, or in tombs. So this, you often see this list of titles like this, which is why some people earlier, in history thought this may be a historical account, because it starts off like an autobiography, like they often do. I was a follower who followed his lord, a servant of the king's, I don't like the king's harem, that's not what it is. He was the king's household, and of the hereditary princess, greatest of praise, wife of King Senwosret in Hnumetsut, and the daughter of King Amenemhat in Ka Nofru, the possessor of an honored state. That means she's dead now. In year 30, month 3 of Achet, day 7, the god ascended to his horizon, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Sehetep Ibre. He penetrated the sky, being joined to the sun disk, the god's body being mixed with that of him who made him. The capital was silent, desires were weak, the great double gate was locked, the court was with head upon knee, and the nobles were mourning. Now his majesty had dispatched an expeditionary force to the land of the, I can never read this word right the first time, Chemehi. I always stumble with it. Chemehi, with his oldest son as its leader, the good god Senwosret. He had been sent to strike the foreign lands and to smite those who were among the Chehenu people. And now he was returning, having brought back captives of the Chehenu people and all kinds of cattle without number. The companions of the palace sent to the western half to inform the king's son of affairs which had taken place in the council chamber. When the messengers found him upon the road and reached him at dusk, he did not delay for a moment. The Falcon flew off with his followers without letting his expeditionary force know it. Now they had written to the sons of the king who were in his following this expeditionary force. When it was being read out to one of them, I was standing by and I heard his voice as he spoke, being in the vicinity of a conspiracy. My senses were disturbed, my arms spread out, and trembling came over every part of me. I took myself off by bounds to find for myself a place of concealment. I placed myself between two shrubs in order to separate the road from its traveler. I went south. I did not plan to reach the capital, for I'd anticipated riots might occur, and I would not be able to say life after him. I crossed the place called the Two Truths in the vicinity of the Sycamore, and I landed at the island of Snefru. I waited at the edge of the cultivation. I set forth at daybreak, and I came upon a man standing in the middle of the road. He greeted me respectfully, for he was frightened. When the time of the evening meal came, I arrived at the wharf of Nagao. It was with the help of the west wind that I crossed over in a boat without a rudder. I passed by to the east of the quarry, above the Mistress of the Red Mountain, that is the opposite side of the river, beyond the cultivation in the desert, and I gave a path to my feet northward until I reached the walls of the prince, which had been made to check the Asiatics and to crush the sand travelers. I took a crouched position in the bush out of fear that the guard on duty on the walls might see. I went by night, and when day came, I had reached Peten. I alighted at the island of Kemware. Thirst overcame me, and it hastened me on. I was parched, my throat dry, and I said, "This is the taste of death." But I raised up my heart, and I gathered together my limbs. I heard the sound of the lowing of cattle, and I looked upon Asiatics. Their Bedouin chief recognized me, a man who had been in Egypt. They gave me water and boiled milk for me, and I went with him to his tribe, and they did for me what was good. One land gave to me another land. I set out for Byblos, and I returned to Kedem. I spent half a year there. It was Musinenshi, again, it always gets me, who brought me back. He was the chief of upper retinue. He said to me, "You will be well with me, for you will hear the speech of Egypt." He said this, for he knew my reputation. He had heard of my intelligence, for the people of Egypt who were there with him bore witness to me. He then said to me, "Why have you come here? Has anything happened in the capital?" Then I said to him, "The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Sehetep Ibre, has proceeded to the horizon. No one knows what may happen because of this." And I spoke equivocally. When I returned from an expedition in the land of the Chemehu, every time one announced that to me, my mind vacillated. My heart was not in my body, and it brought me to the ways of flight. But no one accused me, no one spat in my face, no reproach was heard, and my name was not heard in the mouth of the town crier. I do not know what brought me to this land. It was like the plan of a god. Really? No, you did this to yourself, buddy. He said to me, "How shall that land fare without him, that efficient god, the awe of whom is throughout the foreign lands, like Sachmet in the year of pestilence?" I said to him, so that I might answer him, "To be certain, his son has entered the palace and has taken over the inheritance of his father. He is a god indeed without peer. No other came into being before him. He is a master of knowledge, excellent in planning, and efficient in commanding, one by whose command one comes forth and goes down. It was he who controlled the foreign lands while his father was in the palace. He reported to him what he had decreed had come to. He reported to him what he decreed had come to happen. He is a champion who acts with his, it's not a scimitar, it's like a chopesh, the sickle sword. A fighter without anyone like him when he is seen attacking the bowmen and engaging the fray. He is one who bends back the horn and renders hands powerless so that his enemies cannot muster their ranks. He is vengeful when he cracks skulls and no one can stand up to him. He steps wide when he annihilates the fugitive. There is no success for the one who shows his back to him. He is adamant at the moment of contact. He comes again and does not show his back. He is stalwart of heart when he sees a crowd. He does not allow cowardice around him. He is eager when he falls upon the retinue, and he is joyful when he plunders the bow people. As soon as he takes up his shield, he strikes down. He need not repeat the act of killing, for there's no one who can deflect his arrow, no one who can draw his bow. The bowmen retreat before him as if before the might of the great goddess. He fights on, having foreseen the outcome, and he takes no care for the remnants. But he is well favored and very gentle through love he takes. His city desires him more than himself, and they rejoice because of him more than for their God. Now that he is king, husbands and wives rejoice because of him. While still in the egg, he conquered, and his face was set to it from birth. It is he who has enriched those born with him, for he is one whom God has given. How joyful is this land now that he has reigned. He is one to extend borders. He has vanquished the Southlands, and he will not even have to think about the Northlands, for he was made to smite the Asiatics and crush the sand crossers. Write to him and let him know your name. Do not utter sedition against his majesty, for he will do for you what his father did, and he will not fail to do good to a foreign land which is loyal to him. And he said to me, indeed, Egypt is fortunate now that she knows that he flourishes. You are here, you shall be with me, and what I shall do for you will be good. He placed me in front of his children, and he married me to his eldest daughter. He allowed me to pick from his country the choicest part of what he owned on his border with another country. It was a wonderful land called Ya. There were cultivated figs in it, and grapes, and more wine than water. Its honey was abundant, its olive trees numerous. On its trees were all varieties of fruit. There were barley and emmer, and there was no end to all varieties of cattle. That which fell to my lot as a favored one was great. He set me up as chief of a tribe of the finest in his land. I obtained rations as daily disbursement and wine as daily requirement, cooked meat, roasted fowl beside the desert game. They hunted for me and they set food down before me, in addition to the catch of my hunting dogs. They made for me many sweet things with milk and everything cooked. I spent many years while my offspring became strong men, each man managing his own tribe. A messenger who came north went south to the capital, stayed with me, and I made all Egyptians stay. I gave water to the thirsty man, and I put the wanderer back on the road. I rescued the man who was robbed. When the Asiatics began to stir and to oppose the authority of the chiefs of the foreign lands, I counseled their marches. This ruler of retinue had me spend many years as an officer of his troops. As to any land which I left, when I had made my attack, it was driven off from its cultivation and wells. I had plundered its cattle and brought back its inhabitants, and their produce was taken. I killed the people in it by my strong arm, my bow, my maneuvers, and my efficient advice. It went well with me in his favor, for he loved me and he recognized my bravery. He placed me at the head of his offspring when he saw my arms grow strong. And then came a strong man of retinue to challenge me at my tent. He was a champion without and he had subdued everything. He said that he would fight with me, for he thought to ruin me. He planned to plunder my cattle at the urging of his tribe. But that chief consulted with me, and I said, I don't know you. I had to do that. I was like, I don't know this guy. I'm not a confederate of his that I could stride about in his camp. Had it ever happened that I entered his women's rooms, or have I scaled his walls? It is ill will, for he sees me carrying out your affairs. I'm like a bull of a grazing herd in the midst of another herd. The bull of the kine attacks him, but the Egyptian bull prevails against him. Is a subject loved when he acts as the master? There is no foreign bowman who is the ally of a delta man. What is it that can join a papyrus plant to a rock? Does a bull wish to fight? Then a champion bull will wish to retreat through fear of one who might equal him. But if it is his intention to fight, let him say what he wants. Is God ignorant of what he has ordained, knowing as he does how the matter stands? I spent the night stretching my bow and I shot my arrows. I gave an edge to my dagger and I polished my weapons. When daybreak came, retinue had come. It had urged on its tribes that collected the lands of both its halves. Again, this duality, right? The whole thing is both sides. It had intended this combat. He came out to me where I was waiting, and I placed myself near him. Every heart burned for me. Wives and husbands yelled. Every heart ached for me, saying, is there another strong man who would fight against him? His shield, his axe, his arm full of javelins fell to me. After I had escaped his weapons, I made his remaining arrows pass by me, and not one was left over. Then he let out a yell, for he thought to ruin me, and he approached me. I shot him, my arrow fixed in his neck. He shouted, and he fell upon his nose. I felled him with my own axe. I yelled with my war cry over his back. Every Asiatic screamed. I gave praise to Montu while his adherents mourned for him. His ruler, Amusinenshi, took me in his arms and kissed me in his clasp. I took all his stuff. What he had thought to do to me, I did to him. I took away what was in his tent. I stripped his camp, and it was abundant for me therein. I became rich in treasure, a great proprietor of cattle. God acts in a way to be merciful to one whom he has blamed, one whom he has led astray to another land, for today his heart is appeased. A fugitive fled because of his situation, but my renown is in the capital. A wanderer wandered through hunger, but I gave bread to my neighbor. Through nakedness, a man departed from his land, but I have white clothes and fine linen. A man hurried for lack of someone to send, but I have many servants. My house is fine and my dwelling place is wide. The thought of me is in the palace. O God, whoever you are who decreed this flight, may you be merciful and may you set me in the capital. Perhaps you will let me see the place where my desire lives. What can be more important than joining my dead body to the land where I was born? Come, help me. May a good solution come to pass. May God give me satisfaction. May he act similarly to better the end of one whom he had made miserable and be concerned about one whom he had shunted off to live in a foreign land. If today he is merciful and he hearkens to the prayer of a man far off, may he change my region whence I roamed the earth for him to the place from which he brought me. May the king of Egypt be merciful to me and may I live on his bounty. May I greet the mistress of the land who is in his palace and may I attend to the errands of her children. My body will be youthful again, for old age has come down on me and feebleness has hurried upon me. My eyes are heavy, my arms are immobile, my feet fail to proceed and my senses are exhausted. I am near to passing on, then they shall send me to the cities, when they shall send me to the cities of eternity. But may I still serve the mistress of all, that she may say something good for me to her children. May she pass eternity above me. Now this report was made to his king, Now this report was made to his majesty, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Keper-Ka-Re, who will be judged right, concerning this state in which I was. His majesty sent to me with provisions of the royal bounty. He rejoiced the heart of his servant, as might be done for a ruler of a foreign land. And the king's children who were in his palace had me hear their messages. Copy of the royal decree brought to this servant regarding his being brought back to Egypt. Horus, life of births, and the two ladies, life of births. The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Keper-Ka-Re, son of Re, Senwosret, living forever. The decree of the king to the followers Sinuhe. The decree of the king is brought to you to inform you that you have traversed the foreign countries and come forth from Kedem to Retinue. By your heart's counsel to you, land has given you to land. What have you done that one should act against you? You have not blasphemed that one should reprove your words. You have not spoken in council of the elders that one should reproach your speech. This idea of yours, it took over your senses, and though there was nothing in my mind against you. This heaven of yours, which is in the palace, she is well and she flourishes today as in her former state in the kingship of the land, and with her children in the audience hall. You shall pile up the treasures which they give you, and you shall live off their bounty. Come back to Egypt, and you shall see the capital in which you were born. You shall kiss the ground at the great double gate, and you shall associate with the companions. Today, old age has begun for you, and potency has left you. Think about the day of burial, passing over to an honored state. Night will be appointed for you with oils and poultices in the arms of Tayet. A procession will be made for you on the day of interment. The anthropoid sarcophagus overlaid with gold leaf, the head with lapis lazuli, the sky above you as you are placed in the outer coffin and dragged by teams of oxen preceded by singers. The dance of the mu'u will be performed at your tomb, and the necessary offerings will be invoked for you. They will slaughter at the entrance of your tomb chapel, your pillars to be set up in limestone, as is done for the royal children. You will not die in a foreign land. The Asiatics will not escort you. You shall not be placed in a ram's skin as they make your grave. All of this is too much for one who has roamed the earth. Take thought for your dead body and return. Basically, he goes, yeah, this is awesome. I'm totally coming back to Egypt. And so he returns. And he reaches the wharf of Ichitawi. And so what's cool about this part when he finally arrives at the palace is the only real description we have of the royal palace. 10 men came and 10 men went to usher me to the palace. I touched my forehead to the ground between the sphinxes. The royal children were standing in the gateway to meet me. The companions who showed me into the pillared court sent me on the way to the reception hall. I found His Majesty upon the great throne set in a recess paneled with fine gold. As I was stretched out on my belly, I lost consciousness in his presence. This God addressed me in a friendly way, and I was like a man caught by nightfall. My soul fled and my body shook. My heart was not in my body. I could not tell life from death. His Majesty said to one of these companions, lift him up and let him speak to me. His Majesty said, "See, you have returned now that you have roamed these foreign lands. Exile has ravaged you. You have grown old. Old age has caught up with you. The burial of your body is no small matter. For now you will not be escorted by the bowmen. Do not creep anymore. You did not speak when your name was called out. You shall not fear punishment." I said, "What did you say?" Basically. If I try to answer, there's no shortcoming on my part towards God. It was fear in my body, like that which brought to pass the fated flight. I am in your presence. Life belongs to you. May your Majesty do as he wishes. And the royal children were then brought in. And his Majesty said to them, to the queen, "Here is Sinuhe, who has returned as an Asiatic, whom the Bedouin have raised." She let out a great cry, and the royal children shouted all together. They said before his Majesty, "It is not really he, O sovereign, my lord." His Majesty said, "It is he indeed." So then everyone started playing music and partying and being happy. And everyone is like, "Yay, Sinuhe, you're amazing." And then he went for the robing hall. So he changed out of his Asiatic clothes and changed back into Egyptian clothing. "The royal children gave me their hands, and we went through the great double gate. I was assigned to the house of a king's son. Fine things were in it, a cooling room and representations of the horizon, valuables of the treasure." So now he's got this gorgeous stuff. He slept on a real bed. Meals were brought from the palace, and they even had a pyramid made for him. And he remained in favor of the king until the end of his days. So that was a lot. Sinuhe is kind of a lot. So let's start with this. The god ascended to his horizon. He penetrated the sky, being joined to the sun disk, the god's body being mixed with that of him who made him. That's a lot of fancy ways to say the king died. What does it mean when it keeps saying the king of Upper and Lower Egypt? What does that mean? What is Upper and Lower Egypt? Does anybody know? I know Ray does. Or Andy
North and
does.
south.
Yes. So traditionally, Egypt is two kingdoms united as one. And frankly, even today, there is a huge cultural divide between Northern Egypt and Southern Egypt. By the way, Northern Egypt is Lower Egypt, and Southern Egypt is Upper Egypt. Does anyone have any idea why?
Because you're traveling up the Nile.
Yep, because the Nile flows this way. Fun fact, when Egyptian troops encountered the Euphrates for the first time, they were really wigged out because it flows north to south, and they called it the inverted water. Basically, the upside down river. They were freaked out by it. The Chetanu were a people who lived in what's modern day Libya. So he was somewhere around here when this happened. Now, we don't know what Sinuhe heard that made him freak out so bad that he left Egypt for literally decades. But we do know that the king was assassinated. And if we have a little bit of time towards the end, we're going to look at a text about that. Now, it talks about the Falcon. That's a term for the prince, the crown prince, because the kingship is associated with Horus. And yes, it does use the verb flew, so it's a pun even in the Egyptian. Now, what's interesting is that we can trace his journey based on the places that are mentioned. So if he's somewhere around here, and he is coming this way, the two truths and the island of Sneferu. The two truths are these two pyramids built by Sneferu, who was an old kingdom pharaoh, who was the father of Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid at Giza. So the island of Sneferu would have been his mortuary temple, which was around here somewhere. Now, they talk about the quarry and the mistress of the Red Mountain. Now that's in what is now Cairo. So he basically bypassed the city of Memphis, which was the capital at the time. So you have Mithrahina here. That's the ancient city of Memphis, which was the capital in this time period. Some of it is archaeological site, some of it is underneath modern housing. That's also Ichikawi is around there somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where Ichikawi is, but that is mentioned. But now they talk about the Red Mountain and the quarry. Where is this area is still called the Red Mountain. And the ancient quarries were also around here, the quarries that were used to build the pyramids. Well, not that one. That one had that used imported granite, but most these pyramids. So you can see, stone was just dragged right across. So here we have, and this area is still called the Red Mountain. Look at it. What color is it? It's reddish. So now we know he's here. Now they talk about the walls of the prince. It's also called the walls of the ruler. That's not a real place. It's something that's referenced in texts, but we have no evidence of it being an actual thing. Basically, it's very much, at one point, a pharaoh said, I'm going to build a wall and make the Asiatics pay for it. They never actually built a wall. But that would have been somewhere around here if it was real, but it wasn't. Yeah, it is this wall of the prince, walls of the ruler, is a propaganda wall that never actually got built. Then he goes all the way up to Byblos, which is around here somewhere. Yeah, here we are. So this is how far he goes. So it's interesting, you can actually really track, because almost all the places that he lists are real places. Yeah, and in the middle, there's just a hymn to Senwosret I saying how great he was, which I thought was interesting. They talk about the bowmen. The bowmen are Nubians and people from Libya. They Nubians would, so Nubia is this area here, southern Egypt, northern Sudan. There's something in the chat. Right? The hymn makes me think, and now a word from our sponsors said in the chat. Yeah, basically. And the warriors of Nubia were well known for their bow skills, and we actually, looking at their remains, can see that they were very, very strong bowmen. Do you know how you can tell how someone was a bowman by looking at their skeletal remains?
The attachments on the bone are exaggerated.
That's one way. Also, more denser, thicker bones in their drawing arm. Because especially if you are, there's a reason that strength exercises are recommended for everyone, especially as we age, because it strengthens our bones. And when you are pulling more with one arm than the other, the arm you pull with will have denser stronger bones. And we look and they have, one arm has significantly denser bones than the other. That's another way of telling. But yes, the muscle connections absolutely are another way of seeing what the musculature was like on a skeleton. And then, this actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Moses among the Midianites, doesn't, it's a very, again, I'm not saying that this was taken, that any of the Bible was taken from this, but it's the same kind of literary tradition. Now, now what's interesting, that very much like the description of this magical island, there were cultivated figs and grapes, more wine than water. Wine was originally imported. The wine technology was imported from the Levant to Egypt. So wine in the Levant, because wine originally was the first time wine was made was in well, some people say Georgia, some people say like Macedonia, but it was somewhere in this region, and the wine technology came south. And I'm sorry, a Zoom user, I forget your name. Remind me.
Oh, it's Ryan.
Ryan pointed out in the chat, yes, and astronauts lose bone density in 0G, absolutely. And so, on the trees were all varieties of fruit. So again, this idea, and isn't it interesting when they're talking about a really kind of cool and magical place? It's all about the food. I mean, big same. And eating meat and fowl every day was a big deal. The average diet of your average Egyptian, the diet of your average Egyptian, they would get their protein from beans, chickpeas, fish. If they caught fowl, like ducks and geese, things like mutton and beef was more of a luxury, and that's not something that you would eat on the regular. Now, people who worked in the temples, and particularly the higher priests, who when offerings were given in the temple, there was a ritual to take them back so the food wouldn't go to waste. And we actually see heart disease and clogged arteries in these upper classes that ate beef on the regular, which is kind of interesting. But that wasn't like saying that, they were feeding me like good meat every day. That's like, that's a big deal. Yeah, and then there's this weird interlude with the David and Goliath kind of story. And now we know that he's a Delta man. So this is the Delta. The Delta of the River Nile. And we know that we assume that he was a Delta man, given that he was, working for the king, and the king was ruling out of Mithrahina here, which is a Delta city. But he says here that he was a Delta man. This is written very much like an autobiography. You'll see a lot of parallels. But yeah, and he just totally wrecked him because, of course, Egyptians are the best and the strongest. That's why these random people in Lebanon said, hey, rule my lands. Because, in the Egyptian mind, why wouldn't they? He's an Egyptian. And again, this idea of my body will be youthful again. This idea of when you return to Egypt, you're rejuvenated. And does anyone have any questions about anything else here? Or comments? Jacqueline?
I just had a question about the egg
Yes.
Later, I've never heard that one before, and I don't know if that's related to a specific part of Egyptian like birth mythology.
So think back to the Horus analogy.
Mhm.
While he was still in the egg, while he was a crown prince, but hadn't become king yet. He was not the Horus yet. He was still in the egg.
Okay, I get it.
And in fact, the crown prince is often called the falcon in the nest, referring to the story of Horus growing up in the marsh before he can, have his big showdown with his uncle Set. Absolutely, it's Horus. That's something that I was planning on mentioning, and it totally slipped my mind. Thank you. So this is describing, the burial the king will have made for him, and this is not something that was done for everyone by the king, obviously, but we do know that kings would provide lavish burials for favored courtiers. Now, why this guy is so favored, it's not good storytelling. But it's still very
It's possibly somebody's self-insert fic.
Oh, it is absolutely someone's self-insert fan fiction. I like absolutely, but because it's written like an autobiography. You'll see at the end of these, you will often see things like, where's the you'll see things like, what was the part that made me think of this? I gave bread to my neighbor. That's the kind of thing that you see.
So it's the litany of look at all of the good things I have done that prove
Yeah, which
that
you
I am
absolutely
a good person.
see.
Yeah.
I caused. Yeah, you see things like that in these in these autobiographies. It's written like an autobiography. And do we have a few more minutes, Jacqueline?
Yes, we have about 20 minutes that we can do.
Okay, I'm going to show you what this plot was. But this is a fantastic book, by the way, if you can get your hands on it. Literature of Ancient Egypt. Oh, this is the 3rd edition, Jacqueline. Edited by William Kelly Simpson. What we're going to look at is the teaching of King Amenemhat I for his son Senwosret, which is a very interesting propaganda piece. This is not very long, and it's very interesting. So Amenemhat and Senwosret were Middle Kingdom pharaohs. And we do know, especially from this text, that Amenemhat I was assassinated. This text is very interesting because it is written in the voice of the assassinated king posthumously. And as we get to a certain point in this, you'll see why this was probably written. So we have the beginning of the instruction given by His Majesty of the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Sehetep Ibn life, health, prosperity, son of Re, Amenemhat, justified, which means he's dead. When he spoke, revealing truth to his son, the Lord of all, which is probably Nebu, which is kind of cool. I'd have to look at the text, but I think that's probably what it is. He says, you who have risen as a god, so he's become king, give heed to what I shall say to you, so that you may reign over the land, rule the shores of the Nile, and bring about an abundance of what is good and beneficial. Maintain your vigilance against those who should be subordinate to you, but who turn out not to be so. Men in whose loyalty one can place no trust. Do not let yourself be alone with them. Put no trust in a brother. Acknowledge no one as a friend. Do not raise up for yourself intimate companions, for nothing is to be gained from them. When you lay down at night, let your own heart be watchful over you, for no man has any to defend him on the day of anguish. I was generous to the pauper. I sustained the orphan. I caused him who had nothing to become at length like a man of means. But it was one who ate my bread who conspired against me. One to whom I had given my support devised dread deeds thereby. Those clad in my fine linen behaved to me like worthless louts. Those anointed with my myrrh made my way slippery before me, which literally is poured water underneath me. It's a great image, isn't it? Like, you know, putting a banana peel in someone's path. So he's saying, you know, I was generous. I helped people, you know, and look what these people I helped did to me. Oh, you, my living images, you who share mortality with me, make mourning for me, mourning as such has never been heard. For the burden of that struggle as such had never been seen. When one fights on the fields of struggle with the past forgotten, excellence is of no avail to him, and who knows not what he should know. Now, a description of the assassination. It was after supper when darkness had fallen, and I decided to take an hour of relaxation. I was lying on my bed, for I was tired, and I started to drift off to sleep. Weapons intended for my protection were raised against me, while I acted like a snake of the desert. What do you think that means? While I acted like a snake of the desert.
Laid down?
He was cuddled up in like this little king burrito. Look at the snakes in the desert at night, they cuddle down under the sand. Which he was like, I was all snuggled up in my blankets.
This phrase will stay with me forever.
Well, the little king burrito.
Yes. Snake in the desert.
Yeah. I woke up to the fighting. I pulled myself together and found it was a skirmish of the palace guard. Now I love this part. If I could have quickly taken weapons in my hand, I would have made the cowards retreat in turmoil. But no one is strong at night, and none can fight by himself. No successful result can come about without an ally. And so ruin occurred while I was without you, when the courtiers had not yet heard that I would hand over the throne to you, when I had not yet sat down with you so as to confirm your succession. You see why he's writing this? For I was not ready for it. I did not expect it. My heart had not yet conceived of indolence on the part of the servants. Had women ever organized the troops? Are revolutionaries ever educated right within the palace? So this implies that the women of the palace had something to do with this conspiracy, the conspiracy that Sinuhe heard in this story. Which this wouldn't be the last time the women of the palace worked to assassinate a king, by the way. Ramses III, the harem conspiracy. It's pretty cool. Well, not pretty cool, it was murder, but you know. And so he talks about how great he was and how awesome he was for Egypt. And now everything is chaos. So yeah, I thought this is an interesting thing to follow up, Sinuhe, because it talks about the assassination, that the conspiracy that was discussed in the last story. So opening up the floor to specific questions. Thoughts, comments?
I have a question, if that's okay.
Of course it is.
All right. So I'm more familiar with Greco-Roman epics, Homeric tales, all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
And I know that there is typically a phrase, sing to me, O muse, at the start of these Homeric tales, these oral traditions, all that sort of stuff. Do Egyptians have something similar in the Egyptian tales?
Not really, no.
Okay.
But there is usually at the end of many texts, we have a colophon. So a colophon is a sort of a standard formula. Like at the end of a fairy tale, they lived happily ever after the end.
Right.
You have something like, it has come to the end as found in writing, and if we're lucky, we get the name of the scribe. Yeah, there really was, as far as we can tell, no concept of muses.
Right. I was more referring to the colophon like you were talking about, but at the beginning to refer that this was an oral
Mhm.
tradition more so than it was written down first.
That's a great, I mean, we really, it's a problem with, when you only have
So
one
many
copy of a
extant.
text
Yeah.
and a lot of these, we don't even have the whole thing. We have, it's fragmentary. A great example of this is one of my favorite texts, A Dispute Between a Man and His Ba, which is a very interesting text. It's beautiful poetry. And my personal interpretation of it is first of all, it shows a concept of a separation between the mind and the self, which is very interesting. The Ba is part of the soul, and it's a man, and it really, it's about depression, um, and suicidal ideation without intent to actually harm oneself. Which, and the Ba is saying, once you're dead, man. And the man is saying, he's describing the thought of death as being, he describes it like wind in the sails on a rainy, wind in the sails on a hot day. He describes it like coming home after a long journey. It's, and it's, and it's a very interesting text, but we're missing the beginning. So we don't know the context in which this discussion is happening.
Thank you.
Of course. Does anyone else have any questions before we wrap up?
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up, Willa. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and guys, definitely keep an eye out. We will definitely be doing something like this, very similar. I have an idea for some stuff that's going to happen starting in like December, January 2021, 2022. So keep an eye on that at nopal.org. Willa, would you like to plug your website?
If any of you have any interest in learning how to read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics or Latin, you are more than welcome to check out my website, snowbender.org. I'll be posting some new classes soon, so I'll get on the mailing list for exclusive discounts and stuff.
Excellent. And this recording will be available on Nopal's YouTube page. If you go to YouTube, just search Northern Onondaga Public Library, and it should be available sometime next week, hopefully, if the technology gods smile down upon us. So in the meantime, thank you again for attending. Willa, thank you so much for being an awesome presenter and for a very interesting lecture tonight. Round of silent applause for Willa. And with that being said, thank you guys. I hope you have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.
All right, take care.
Bye, everybody.